We had one bike, a mattress on the floor, and a spreadsheet called survival. No car, no streaming, no takeout, just rice, lentils, and a plan. People thought we were struggling, but we were finally breathing. This is what radical budgeting actually looks like. Watch the full story. Lived on $12,000 a year. They didn't own a car. They didn't split a two-bedroom. They didn't have a second income. And yet, they weren't falling behind. In the heart of one of the most expensive cities in America, a young couple made a choice most people would call insane. Live on just $12,000 a year. Their names were Lena and Amir. Both 32. Both soft-spoken. Both outsiders to the city when they arrived. Lena, with her warm olive skin and determined eyes, had come from the Arizona desert. Amir, medium brown skin and calm resilience in his gaze, had grown up in a working-class neighborhood of Detroit. They met during a community food drive in Chicago years earlier, where they both volunteered to sort donations. A box of expired peanut butter, a shared joke about stale granola bars, and something stuck. They moved in together 6 months later. But this wasn't Chicago. This was San Francisco. They came here chasing freelance gigs, Lena doing captioning work and Amir picking up seasonal landscaping jobs and bakery shifts. They arrived with about $2,000 between them. No family nearby. No support network. Just hope and a spreadsheet titled Survival Budget. When Lena lost a steady client and Amir's landscaping gig ended, the spreadsheet became gospel. Rent was $575 a month for a 330-square-foot studio, a lucky find on a neighborhood board. Utilities were another $60. They sold a car for $3,200 cash and bought a used steel frame bicycle for $120. Not because they were broke, but because they wanted out of the loop of endless spending, out of the subtle, persistent pressure to appear middle class, even when they were barely scraping by. It's not poverty if you choose it, Lena once said. And Amir had nodded, not quite sure, but trusting her clarity. The bike became their lifeline. Amir took it to the bakery at dawn, balancing a duffel bag of fresh bread on the back rack. Lena rode it mid-morning to the public library, where she worked on her captioning contracts and streamed educational videos on credit repair, taxes, frugal meal prepping. They called their routine the shift change. One would hand off the bike to the other halfway down a block. Some days they walked it side by side. People stared. Drivers honked. One woman yelled from her SUV, "Get a car, hippies." But Lena? She smiled. She liked feeling the wind on her face. She liked watching the streets change with the weather, seeing the fog lift off the bay. She liked knowing that every ride saved them another dollar, another choice. Inside their tiny studio, every square inch had a purpose. The mattress sat in one corner, flanked by milk crates acting as nightstands. A folding card table served as a desk, a dining table, and sometimes an ironing board. Their stovetop doubled as a heater in the winter. Not ideal, but effective. On the windowsill, a potted basil plant named Benny leaned toward the pale sun. Their kitchen had exactly 2 mugs, 3 mismatched plates, and a single pan. Meals were built from scratch. Beans soaked overnight, rice bought in bulk, stir-fried cabbage with vinegar and spices. Dinner was often a quiet ritual, a shared bowl, a flickering candle, and soft music from Amir's cracked phone speaker. They tracked every penny. Lena kept a notebook where she wrote their daily expenses, no matter how small. Amir called it the Book of Truth. "We're not poor," Amir would say. "We're precise." Lena's old friends didn't understand. They would message her from cities like Austin or Atlanta, sending photos of their new apartments, their brunches, their dogs. "Girl, come back to real life," one texted. But Lena had tried that life. Credit cards, Amazon deliveries, clothing subscriptions. She remembered crying into a stack of unpaid bills 2 years ago, her entire paycheck gone in 3 days. This new life, it had its own quiet luxury. In spring, they grew herbs and cut off milk jugs on the fire escape. In summer, they walked to the free jazz concerts in the park. In fall, they hosted potluck picnics with 2 friends and a shared thermos of lentil soup. In winter, they cuddled under 3 blankets and watched borrowed DVDs on Amir's old laptop. The first time they hit $1,000 in savings, they didn't even celebrate. They just looked at each other, and Lena whispered, "Let's get a 5." They had rules. No new clothes unless something ripped. No restaurant meals unless someone else paid. No subscriptions, no Uber rides, no impulse buys. Lena even made her own toothpaste once. A disaster, but it saved $4. Amir learned to cut his own hair. They bought expired but sealed cans of food from a discount salvage store. They fixed everything, from broken chairs to leaking faucets, with online tutorials and secondhand tools. And yet, they never felt deprived. They felt empowered. They said no to dinner invites they couldn't afford. They said no to job offers that would steal too much time and too little freedom. They said no to the narrative that said success must be shiny and fast. They weren't running away from ambition. They were redefining it. Lena wanted to write. Amir wanted to start a micro-bakery one day. They knew it would take time, but they were building a foundation, brick by brick, dollar by dollar. One night, Lena found an old photo of herself on Facebook. Heels, wine glass, rooftop bar. She stared at it for a long time. At the makeup, the expensive dress, the forced smile, and she whispered, almost like a confession, "I used to think that girl had it together, but she was drowning. And this version of me, on the floor, in a hoodie, eating rice, is the one who finally learned how to breathe." In that moment, Amir looked up from a book and smiled. They didn't have much, but what they had chosen. And in a world that constantly screamed for more, choosing less was the most radical thing they could do. At first glance, it looked like a grocery list. But to Lena and Amir, that piece of torn notebook paper taped to the fridge was a lifeline. Written in fine black ink, the top read, "Weekly max, $42. Underneath, a precise tally of needs, wants, and things they hoped would go on sale. Brown rice, 5 pounds bag, $3.50. Dry lentils, 2 pounds, $2.20. Cabbage, 1 head, $1.99. Carrots, 99 cents per pound. Eggs, $3.29. And then, with a hopeful question mark, tofu block, if sale, $1.69. This was how they lived. Not recklessly, not with passive hope, but with spreadsheets, scratch paper, and intent. Rent was their anchor. $575 a month, paid on the first, in cash, slid in an envelope under the landlord's office door. They chose that studio not for its charm. There was none, but because it gave them breathing room. Their total annual income target, just under $12,000. Rent would take $6,900 a year. That left them $5,100 to survive on. Utilities, food, transit, clothes, emergencies, birthdays, and saving. Somehow still saving. It didn't leave room for error. But that was the point. Lena became a master of systems. Not in theory, in blood, sweat, and 33-cent notebooks from the dollar store. She tracked every purchase, every round-trip bus ride, every grocery receipt. Even when they didn't spend anything, she'd write. No spend day, walked, packed lunch, library Wi-Fi. They had rules. Not arbitrary, not aesthetic. Just the kind of rules that make survival feel structured. Rule number 1. Never grocery shop without a list. Impulse was the enemy. Walking into a market hungry was like stepping into war barefoot. Rule number 2. Leftovers are gold. Every meal had to stretch at least twice. Amir would portion out rice and lentils into reused takeout containers for tomorrow's lunch before they even ate dinner. Nothing hit the garbage unless it was spoiled beyond recovery. Rule number 3. No fixed bills outside rent. No car meant no insurance. No internet. Lena tethered to a prepaid phone data plan and worked from the library most days. Even their electricity use was carefully monitored. They unplugged chargers. They used LED bulbs. Amir once read an entire 700-page novel under a desk lamp because it cost 1/10 of the energy of the ceiling light. But it wasn't just about deprivation. It was about freedom through boundaries. "I like knowing what we have," Amir said one night, after paying rent early. "Not what we might have. Not what the card lets us pretend we have. Just what we actually have." They kept envelopes hidden in an old shoebox under the bed, labeled in Lena's handwriting. Rent, food, savings, emergency, gifts. Each envelope held physical cash. Every dollar was spoken for. Every category was sacred. One month, Amir got a bonus shift at the bakery. He brought home an extra $46. Most people would splurge. a meal out, a new jacket. They debated for a full night what to do with it. In the end, $20 went into emergency, $10 into gifts for an upcoming cousin's birthday, $10 into savings, $6. They split at the dollar store. Lena got a bottle of cinnamon, and Amir bought a used puzzle book. They celebrated that night with stovetop popcorn and cinnamon sprinkled over plain oatmeal. Sometimes, Lena felt the temptation. It came late at night. Ads flashing on her phone, friends posting about brunches, new dresses, flights. Once, she hovered over an online cart. 2 sweaters, 1 pair of shoes, a discounted handbag. The total? $54.97. She stared at it for a long time. Then she closed the tab. "This isn't what I want," she whispered. "This is what I used to think would make me feel safe." Instead, she pulled out her budget notebook. Added a line. Temptation. $54.97 not spent. Still winning. They found joy in the smallest places. Once, they walked 2 miles to a Korean market that sold bruised fruit for half price. Another time, they got 4 loaves of bread from the bakery's discard bin, then hosted a toast night with every combination they could dream up. Peanut butter plus banana, tomato plus basil, even olive oil plus sugar. Don't knock it till you try it. Amir grinned. They found treasure in secondhand stores. A $2 winter scarf, a pan with a bent handle Amir hammered straight, a radio that only worked when tapped just right. Lena once sewed a broken zipper with dental floss. Amir fixed a leaky pipe using a shoelace and a clamp. Not glamorous, but functional, honest. And honest things, they lasted. Their love grew in this life. Quietly, fiercely. They learned each other's habits like architects study blueprints. Lena needed silence when she worked. Amir learned to read in the hallway with a thermos of tea. Amir liked small breakfasts. Lena saved leftover lentils to roll into morning wraps. On their anniversary, they didn't go out. They lit a candle, wrote letters to each other, and traded gifts worth no more than $3. Lena gave him a poem written on the back of a rice bag. Amir carved her a tiny pendant from a piece of driftwood he found by the ferry dock. She cried when she opened it, not because of what it cost, but because of what it meant. Their savings crept higher. $2,000 by March, $3,400 by July, $5,015 by December 28th. They hadn't just survived the year. They had won the year. And they did it in a city where most people spent more than $5,000 just on transportation. No credit card debt, no overdrafts, no help from family, just discipline, strategy, and a belief that enough could actually feel like more. They knew it wouldn't always be like this. Maybe one day, they'd have a second room, a microwave, a second bike, but they never wanted to forget what it felt like to live on purpose. One night, Lena said it aloud. "We thought rice and rent would be the hardest part, but it turned out it was the beginning of peace." And Amir, placing a final dollar in their savings envelope for the year, replied, "Peace tastes like lentils and quiet nights." And I'd never trade it back. For the first 9 months, their system held strong. Discipline, balance, routine. But then, something shifted. It was a Tuesday when Amir came home limping. Lena was sorting rice into jars when she saw his face. Pale, tight-lipped. He set the bike down gently by the door, but winced as he straightened up. "What happened?" she asked, her voice already dipping into worry. He waved it off. "Slipped on the bakery floor. Just twisted it, I think." But it wasn't just a twist. By nightfall, his ankle was the size of a grapefruit. They iced it, elevated it, wrapped it in an old scarf. But by morning, the bruising had turned deep violet, and he couldn't put any weight on it. Lena insisted, "We need to go to urgent care." Amir looked at the budget sheet on the wall like it might rewrite itself if he stared hard enough. "We don't have $400 for a sprain," he muttered. But they did go, because pain doesn't wait for savings goals. The x-ray cost $220. The doctor's brace, another $80. A follow-up was recommended, but they skipped it. Amir promised to stay off the foot for 2 weeks. The bakery shifts dried up immediately. No work, no pay. That was the first crack. By week 2, Lena's laptop started overheating again. She'd been nursing along for months with cooling fans and careful positioning. But this time, it froze mid-project, then refused to turn on. Her client canceled the contract. "We need someone more consistent," the email said. "Sorry. Another $300 gone. overnight. They sat at the card table in silence. The rice on their plates had gone cold. Their savings, so carefully built, had dropped below $2,800 in less than 10 days. No new money coming in. No clients. No bakery shifts. No backup plan. For the first time since they began their radical frugal journey, panic crept in. Amir tried to make light of it. "We still have the basil plant," he joked, pointing to Benny, now browning at the edges from too many sunless days. Lena didn't laugh. That night, she curled up beside him and whispered, "Are we stupid for doing this?" He didn't answer right away, just pulled the blanket tighter around them and said, "Not stupid, just tested." The next morning, Lena woke up early and rode the bike alone for the first time in weeks. She didn't go to the library. She went looking for work. She printed 10 resumes, each one tailored to coffee shops, bookstores, bakeries. She dropped them off in person. Some turned her away immediately. A few took the paper with forced smiles. One manager, a woman named Rosanna, looked her over and asked, "Can you start Thursday?" Minimum wage, 12 hours a week. Barista work. Lena accepted on the spot. They adapted again. Amir stayed home, foot elevated, reading cookbooks from the library. He began baking in their tiny oven, first for practice, then for potential. He calculated the cost of ingredients down to the penny. Lena brought home free coffee beans and bruised muffins after a shift. They stretched every perk. They let go of pride. Lena took on more hours. Amir made flyers for homemade sourdough. They pinned them to laundromat bulletin boards, community fridges, bus stops. "Pay what you can," the flyer said. Neighbors began to respond. Slowly. First a man from down the block. Then a single mom who said, "This is better than store-bought." Then 3 loaves ordered by a retiree who tipped $10. By November, they'd clawed back their momentum. Amir's ankle healed. Lena landed a steady captioning job again. Lower pay, but reliable. They had been shaken, yes, but not broken. The savings balance? $3,700. Not the $5,000 they had hoped. But every dollar in that account felt heavier now, earned through sweat, pivots, and bruised bread deliveries. They learned something in that hard season. Frugality isn't immunity. It's resilience. It doesn't keep the world out. It just makes you strong enough to face it. One night, as Amir pulled a loaf from the oven, the smell of fresh rosemary and flour filling the room, he turned to Lena and said, "We bent, but we didn't break." Lena smiled, holding a chipped mug of tea. "No, we baked instead." They didn't feel it all at once. That's the thing about small wins. They don't announce themselves. There's no confetti, no sudden clarity, just fewer knots in the stomach. A quieter kind of calm, the kind that arrives with time, with repetition, like the scent of bread rising slowly from the oven. By December, Amir's side hustle had grown legs. He called it bread and resolve. Lena had laughed when he named it, but he was serious. "This isn't just about food," he said. "It's about something built with patience. Like us." Word spread slowly. No social media, no marketing budget, just handwritten flyers, warm referrals, and the smell of sourdough drifting through apartment vents. He baked 3 loaves a day, sold them for whatever people could pay. Some gave $5. Others gave 10. One woman left a handwritten note that read, "I haven't tasted bread like this since my mother was alive. Thank you." Lena's new captioning job was steady, but still paid less than she once made. So she leaned into other kinds of income. She started offering transcription workshops at the library, free to attend, but tip-based. She advertised it as skill swapping. Learn, then pay it forward. The first workshop had 2 people. The third had 9. By spring, she was making nearly $150 a month just from those sessions. And more importantly, she was building a community of people who also wanted out of the chaos. People who didn't want more stuff, just more control. They still kept their rules, still walked instead of busing, still tracked every expense. But now, there was space. They could afford a second pan, a folding bookshelf from a yard sale, a second pillow, so Lena didn't have to ball up sweaters under her neck anymore. What changed wasn't just their finances. It was their relationship to money. It no longer controlled them. It served them. Each dollar had a job, not just to pay, but to preserve, to create, to protect their choices. They found freedom in the tiniest places. like discovering that rice flour was cheaper in bulk, and that Amir could make his own crackers with it, or that the local farmer's market gave out free, unsold produce after noon if you just asked kindly. Lena even found a thrifted sewing machine, used it to mend clothes for neighbors, charging nothing, just collecting kind favors in return. Their world grew wider, not with income, but with trust, with resourcefulness. One Sunday afternoon, they sat by the window with bowls of homemade soup and watched a group of tourists take photos across the street. Lena looked down at the soup, just potatoes, onion skins, a few herbs, and said, "I used to think winning meant earning six figures." Amir took a sip and replied, "Now I think it means knowing you'll be okay if you don't." That night, they updated their savings tracker. They had $4,450 saved. So close. They high-fived. No celebration. No champagne. Just Amir tapping the basil pot and whispering, "Almost there, Benny." Their shifts in mindset became habits. They stopped dreaming of having more and started imagining doing more with less. Lena drafted a guide, How to Live on Almost Nothing in a City. It was supposed to be for themselves, just notes in a notebook, but she started sharing it in her workshops. Soon, someone from a nonprofit asked if she'd speak at a local event. They didn't pay, but they gave her a platform, an audience, new friends, leads for better-paying captioning work. The more they gave, the more they received. And it didn't make sense, not on paper, but it made sense to their hearts. One Saturday in March, they finally reached it. $5,012.73 in savings. 12 months, almost to the day. Lena opened the shoebox that night, unfolded the envelope marked savings, and whispered, "We did it." They hugged for a long time. Not tight, just close. Quiet. Like two people who'd climbed a mountain with bare feet and didn't need to shout about it. They didn't post about it. Didn't announce it. They just went to sleep with smiles that wouldn't quit. And in the morning, they made pancakes. With cinnamon. And real maple syrup. From a sample bottle Amir had bartered for with a loaf of bread. It wasn't a victory you could photograph. But it was the kind that stays in your bones. They didn't escape the system. They just refused to let it define them. And from that refusal, something powerful grew. Choice. Calm. A kind of wealth you can't bank, but that pays you back every day you wake up and say, "I have enough, and I know how to make it last." It's strange how something as small as a $5 bill can carry the weight of 100 decisions. To most people, it's a cup of coffee. For Lena and Amir, it was the margin between survival and strategy. Every single purchase, every apple, bus ride, spool of thread, went through the same silent question. Will this help us grow, or just make the day easier? In April, Amir walked past a neighborhood yard sale. It was one of those bright spring mornings where everything looks more generous, more possible. He almost didn't stop, but something on the folding table caught his eye. A second-hand bread lame, a blade tool used for scoring dough, rusted, but still functional. Next to it, a tin of dried rosemary, and beside that a book, Baking with Wild Yeast, From Starter to Soul. He asked the woman running the sale, how much for all three. $5, she said. Take 'em all. No one bakes anymore. He held the items in his hands. It felt like holding the next step forward. That $5 changed everything. The lame helped him score cleaner loaves, better crusts, more even rise. The rosemary became a house staple, sprinkled into oil, folded into dough, gifted as fragrance. The book? It taught him things he'd never known. How to make his own starter. How to use potato water as base. How to coax flavor from thyme, not ingredients. He named his first sourdough starter Hope. Hope lived in a mason jar on the windowsill. They fed it like a pet. Around the same time, Lena sat at a bus stop after a long workshop session. She'd made $9 in donations that day. Two people had stayed after to thank her for making budgeting feel human. Across the street was a small print shop. A going out of business sign hung crookedly in the window. Inside, old supplies sat in dusty stacks, folders, ink, labels, markers. Lena found a pack of 40 blank mailing labels marked $1. Something sparked. She bought them and walked straight home. She opened her budget guide draft on her laptop and began printing. Page 1. How to cook for $1. Page 2. The envelope system in real life. Page 3. Emergency prep when you're already broke. She folded each one into zines, taped them together by hand, and slid one into the free book-sharing box outside the library. A week later, it was gone. The next week, she left 3 more. They disappeared too. By June, people had started leaving her notes in the box. One read, "I use your grocery list. I have $23 left for the month, and I'm not panicking." Another said, "You should teach this." Officially, their $5 decisions weren't just survival. They were seeds. And people noticed. Neighbors began knocking, asking questions. "Where do you buy your rice? What's that smell? Do you make that bread? Are you the ones who leave the little finance books?" They never advertised. But word spreads fast when it's born from authenticity. One man, Greg, lived down the hall. Former line cook. Hadn't worked much since the pandemic. One day, he showed up at their door with a bag of onions and a cracked Dutch oven. "You guys want to try cooking together?" They said yes. That week, they made a stew big enough to feed 5. Shared it with 2 others from the building. And just like that, a network began to form. Not a social club, a support web. People who pooled leftovers, traded tips, shared mending skills, even passed down old phones and winter coats. No one called it a community, but it was. Amir and Lena began keeping a new notebook. Title, The $5 List. A journal of every single moment that shifted their trajectory for less than $5. It included the rosemary bread lame, Lena's label pack, a 99-cent thrift store frame they used to hang a quote above the bed. Enough is everything. A bag of discount apples that led to their first shared pie. Each entry had a date, a note, a small drawing. Over time, the pages filled, and with each one, their confidence grew. Not in wealth, but in wisdom. They weren't immune to temptation. One afternoon, they passed a flashy new bakery in town. The smell was intoxicating. A sign read, "Butter brioche, $4.75. Amir stopped. He looked through the glass, watched the barista slide it gently into a white paper bag. Then he smiled, stepped back, and said, "I can make it better." That night he did. It wasn't perfect, but it was theirs. In the world outside, $5 was nothing. In their world, it was possibility. And over time, that shift in value system changed how they saw everything. Lena once told a friend, "The difference between a consumer and a creator is just what you do with $5. They didn't need grants. They didn't need a GoFundMe. They needed discipline, curiosity, and faith in tiny wins. That was how they got this far. And that's how they would keep going. The money didn't come in big waves. It wasn't a sudden inheritance. It wasn't a viral moment. There was no sponsorship deal. It came in trickles, in coffees handed back with a keep the change, in folded bills slipped into workshop tip jars, in emails that began with, "Hey, I read your zine." This wasn't passive income. It was purpose income, and Lena never saw it coming. It started with a librarian. Her name was Helen. Mid-60s. Bright scarves. Always smelled faintly of cinnamon and ink. Helen had attended one of Lena's free workshops and left with 2 zines tucked under her arm. The next day, she called Lena back into the community room. "We host a monthly resource group," she said. "Low income, mostly older women. Budgeting is a big topic. Want to lead something?" Lena hesitated. "I'm not certified. I'm not a coach." Helen smiled. "Neither were the people who taught me how to garden. Doesn't mean they weren't the best teachers I ever had." That session changed everything. There were 12 women in the room. 3 spoke fluent English. 2 had never opened a bank account. 1 kept her savings and cash hidden in her freezer. Lena ditched the slides, sat down, pulled out her envelope system, shared her grocery receipts, showed her notebook with the words, "March 12th, $0 day." Made pancakes, walked. We smiled a lot, and for the first time, she watched eyes light up. Not because she was an expert, but because she was honest. Afterward, 2 women pulled her aside. One handed her a folded $20. "You should get paid for this." The other said, "Would you come to my housing center next month?" Lena said yes. No hesitation this time. And just like that, her workshop stopped being free. Not because she chased profit, but because people insisted on giving something back. By summer, she was doing 2 sessions a week. Church basements, YMCAs, senior centers. Sometimes she earned $15, sometimes $75, sometimes just a home-cooked meal. And yet it added up. She still tracked every dollar. Called it income that cost nothing. It wasn't side hustle income. It was acknowledgement income, a paycheck written in trust, in value exchanged, in the deep satisfaction of giving someone else their first glimpse of peace. Amir called it the second income, not because it made them rich, but because it changed how they saw wealth. They started using part of it for things they never would have before. They bought stamps, for mailing Lena's zines to rural libraries. They bought a solar-powered calculator for a woman who always borrowed one during workshops. They even bought a portable projector for $43, used, so Lena could show visuals without begging community centers for outdated gear. And the more they gave, the more they received. Amir's bread sales grew quietly. Now 5 loaves a day. A new client ordered for her office once a week. He began saving for a new oven. Lena was invited to speak at a city-run financial wellness night. There was no honorarium, but 47 people came. She left with 8 new workshop invites and $96 in tips. They didn't see themselves as business owners. Not yet, but they saw themselves differently. Capable, creative, respected not because they had degrees or resumes, but because they showed up, week after week, with truth, tools, and patience. Lena once told Amir, "The world pays you back when you stop pretending and start contributing." He nodded, and we didn't even need to raise our income. We just stopped wasting the one we had. That fall, they reviewed their books. $12,000 in total income again. But this time, the structure had shifted. Only half came from their original freelance work. The rest, from community contributions, sales, sessions, gratitude. And they had saved more than ever. $5,427. They marked it on the wall calendar with a simple word: overflow. Not because they had extra, but because they finally felt full. And for the first time since stepping into the city, they felt seen, not as a struggling couple, but as builders. They used to say yes to everything. Extra shifts, last-minute jobs, awkward social invites, any opportunity that smelled like money or networking. Because saying no felt dangerous. Saying no felt like failure, like wasting a chance they might never see again. But that was before they learned that the most powerful form of wealth is the ability to choose. And now they had earned the right to say no. The first no was small. A client Lena used to work with reached out. "We've got a fast turnaround project. Low pay, but high exposure." Lena smiled at the phrase. She used to fall for that one. Instead, she typed 3 words: thanks, but no. It felt better than a yes ever had. The second no came for Amir. A nearby restaurant offered him a position. Kitchen prep. $14 per hour. Night shifts. No tips. Long hours. They needed someone who could grind. He almost said yes. But that night, as he pulled a rosemary loaf in the oven, he looked at the crust. Perfect crackling, golden edge, and thought, "I'm not meant to grind. I'm meant to create." So he said no, and doubled down on his micro bakery. He didn't scale it. He didn't hire. He just focused on making it better. More flavor. Better starter. Cleaner systems. Less waste. They began saying no to more things. No to social obligations that drained them. No to purchases that solved problems they didn't really have. No to urgency disguised as opportunity. They stopped chasing. Started choosing. One day, Lena got a message from a startup. "We want to license your zines into digital content. We'll package them as part of our new budgeting course. Think you fit in?" It came with numbers. Decent ones. But when she clicked the link, the site was filled with smiling influencers and lifestyle branding. Slick. Polished. Shiny. Nothing about it felt like Benny the Basil plant, or the notebook she filled at 3 a.m. with tips for buying cabbage on food stamps. So she declined, and made 5 more physical zines instead. Printed them on repurposed paper. Hand-folded, as always. The irony? The more they said no, the more things came to them. Better clients. Collaborations. A neighbor offered Amir space in her garage to bake more loaves, rent-free. Someone else donated a newer toaster oven. An editor from a local paper asked Lena to contribute a column called Living on Less. No pitch. No hustle. Just alignment. They began practicing intentional rest. 1 weekend every month. No work. No baking. No budgeting. No library hours. They called it low battery days. They walked, sat in the park, read used books, made tea, talked. One Sunday, Amir surprised Lena with a drawing, a tiny cabin in the woods, drawn on brown paper. Underneath, he wrote, Someday, this will be our full-time no. Because saying no wasn't about isolation. It was about direction. Each no cleared the path. Each no made the yes feel more whole. Yes to community. Yes to presence. Yes to enough. They didn't reject ambition. They just redefined it. Not upward, but inward. Measured not in metrics, but in meaning. Not in followers, but in follow-through. Not in expansion, but in peace. They still made $12,000 a year. But they had found the luxury most people spent their whole lives chasing. The ability to say, this isn't for me. And that's okay. And that kind of wealth, you can't buy. You can only build. You think they'd miss it. The car, the couch, the dinners out, the weekends of Target strolls and takeout. You'd think they'd long for what they once called normal life. But they didn't. Not even once. Because what Lena and Amir walked away from wasn't really theirs to begin with. There's a quiet kind of liberation in letting go of things that never actually made you happy. It didn't happen all at once. The transition was messy, slow, sometimes uncertain. But by the time they were deep in year 2 of their $12,000 lifestyle, they realized they hadn't lost anything. They had shed everything that didn't fit the life they wanted. Take the car. Sure, it was convenient. But they didn't miss the $700 plus a month it cost them between insurance, fuel, maintenance, parking tickets, and the creeping anxiety that came every time the check engine light flickered. Now they had one steel-framed bicycle. No dashboard. No oil changes. Just fresh air. Movement. A rhythm that reminded them of who they were becoming. They let go of furniture. When they first moved in, they talked about buying a real bed frame. A couch. A dining table. Instead, they kept the mattress on the floor. Ate at a fold-out table. Used milk crates for shelves. And over time, it stopped feeling temporary. It started feeling intentional. More space to move. More clarity in the room. More focus on each other. Less clutter in the corners. They gave up streaming services. At first, that one stung. Lena used to binge shows to decompress. Amir was hooked on documentaries. But they learned to borrow DVDs from the library. And that came with something unexpected. Patience. No autoplay. No endless scroll. Just one story at a time. Watched slowly. Discussed over tea. Sometimes, that ritual felt more cinematic than the shows themselves. They gave up them all. They stopped shopping for pleasure. No, just browsing. No therapy in a cart. Their clothes came from thrift stores and clothing swaps. And not once did they feel underdressed. Amir's jeans were patched twice, but fit better with every repair. Lena's oversized hoodie had become her uniform. Comfortable, warm, and deeply hers. When you wear what you love, you forget that fashion ever needed a season. They gave up smartphones. At least the modern kind. No notifications. No algorithm. Just prepaid phones, Wi-Fi at the library, and handwritten notes stuck to the fridge. It made scheduling clumsy sometimes. But it made space for something else. Presence. When they were home, they were home. When they spoke, they listened. And when silence fell, it didn't feel awkward. It felt earned. They gave up weekend spending. No brunch. No drinks. No spontaneous Uber rides. Instead, they built weekend rituals that cost nothing and gave everything. Saturday walks through neighborhoods they couldn't afford to live in, but loved to dream in. Sunday mornings with pancakes and books. Lentil soup on the stovetop. And long, meandering conversations about who they were becoming. They gave up credit. No credit cards. No loans. No lines to float them through hard months. It was terrifying at first, but it made every decision real. If they didn't have the money, they didn't buy it. If they couldn't afford the risk, they didn't take it. And slowly, that boundary became freedom. They gave up appearances. They stopped trying to look like they had it together. Stopped explaining their life to people who didn't understand. Stopped justifying their choices. Not because they didn't care, but because they were too busy living a life they actually believed in. Lena once wrote in her notebook, "We don't have less. We just stopped renting more than we could carry." They had traded up into peace, up into autonomy, up into a life they didn't need to numb themselves to survive. They never missed the old life, because they finally had room for the life they wanted. Room to breathe, room to think, room to say no, room to wait for things worth waiting for. One night, Amir stood at the window, holding a mug of tea. Lena sat cross-legged on the floor, journaling by candlelight. He turned to her and asked, "If we had a sudden windfall, like $100,000, What would you buy? She didn't answer right away. Then, without looking up, she said, maybe a pressure cooker. And a better chair for you to read in. They laughed. That was it. That was all they could think of. And that was everything. They never wanted to retire early. That wasn't the goal. They didn't crave beachfront getaways, a minimalist van life vlog, or financial independence hashtags. They just wanted one thing: control over their time. And now, after 2 years on $12,000 a year and over $10,000 in savings, they were ready for something new. Not more money, not more things, but a longer vision, something they could build slowly, together. It started, like most things with them, on a walk. Amir was carrying a loaf wrapped in a thrifted towel. Lena had her zine bag slung over her shoulder, half empty from a workshop downtown. They were passing a neglected city lot, just chain-link fence and weeds, when Amir said, "You ever think about buying land?" Lena smiled. "With what?" "Basil plant dividends." He shrugged. "Not in the city. Somewhere quiet. Cheap. Just enough for a shed. Maybe a garden. A wood stove." She didn't laugh. She nodded. A place where time feels slow again. That night, they stayed up with tea and paper. Made lists, not of things they wanted, but of values they needed. Silence. Sunlight. Trees. A small oven. A place to write. A place to grow things. No debt. No rush. Then they opened their savings envelope. $10,437. Still not much, but enough to ask, what would it take? Over the next month, they researched off-grid plots. Small parcels outside the city. Some under $5,000. Amir found YouTube videos about composting toilets and solar kits. Lena emailed rural town offices asking about taxes and permits. They weren't in a hurry. The plan wasn't to escape. It was to expand, to build on what they had learned, to grow from it. But they needed a place to put roots in the soil. Not just routines. A space to live on purpose, fully. In the meantime, they kept living lean, kept baking, teaching, walking. But their vision shifted from just surviving the year to shaping the next 10. They began tracking time differently. Instead of bills due, their calendar listed. Next workshop theme: when you feel behind. Sourdough 2.0, try einkorn flour. Solar power research call. Practice quiet. They started calling their savings fund the land jar. Each time they added a few dollars, they wrote the new total on a paper taped to the wall. Land jar, $10,489, $10,503, $10,532. No one else would have been impressed. But they were building a future in slow motion. Lena reached out to a rural librarian in Northern California. "Would you host a workshop if I brought a bag of zines and no laptop?" The librarian wrote back, "We'd be honored. People here still read paper." She went the next week. Slept on a couch someone offered. Paid for the bus ride with a barter. When she returned, she said one thing. It felt like space again. Amir started sketching a layout for their dream plot. A tiny house made with salvage wood. Outdoor oven. Garden bed boxes. A shaded bench under trees. A wind chime made of spoons. A clothesline. A water barrel. A mailbox with no name. Just L and Lena taped it to the wall. Not as a fantasy. As a target. And in the most unexpected way, the dream made them even more disciplined. They turned down high-paying gigs that didn't align. They walked past good deals that didn't matter. They chose library books over Kindle. Bread flour over brunch. Time over trend. Because this was never about money. It was about crafting a life from the inside out. And that life now had direction. It didn't require millions. Just commitment. And the courage to keep walking, step by quiet step. Lena once wrote in her journal, "We used to live in reaction. Now we live in design." That was the difference. Not what they had, but what they were aiming for. And for the first time in their lives, their vision wasn't abstract. It was specific, tactile, something they could almost smell, like sourdough crust or damp earth after rain. Their plan forward wasn't flashy. It wasn't fast, but it was theirs. And in a world of noise, that was the rarest thing of all. There was no big reveal. No confetti moment. No giant check. No stranger handing them keys to a house with a bow on it. That's not how this story ends. Because for Lena and Amir, it never really ends. It just continues quietly, intentionally, like the turning of a page. What they were building was never about reaching a number. It was about reaching a feeling. Enough. Enough money to live without panic. Enough food to never go hungry. Enough time to be present with each other. Enough space to grow. Enough quiet to hear their own thoughts. Enough purpose to guide their days. Enough peace to sleep deeply. Enough. It wasn't something they found in a single decision. It was in the layers. Layer after layer of no, thank you. Of let's wait. Of we can do this differently. Of reusing. Rethinking. Resisting the pull to consume. It was in riding the same bike for 2 years. In eating rice and lentils with joy. In counting every dollar not with fear, but with reverence. They had stripped life down to its bones. And what was left? A love that was still intact. A body of work that was growing. And a belief that small lives could still be epic when they were lived fully awake. There were no vacations. No designer clothes. No Instagrammable kitchens. But there were Friday nights spent eating warm bread and watching storms from the window. There were mornings when the air smelled like yeast and basil. There were long walks where neither of them said much, because the silence was already saying everything. And maybe that's the point of this whole story. That freedom isn't a finish line. It's a discipline, a choice, a kind of radical presence in a world obsessed with progress. One night, Lena wrote on the back of a scratch paper grocery list, "We never became rich, but we did become free." And I think that matters more. She folded it into her notebook. Later that week, Amir found it. He added a line underneath. "We became full." That was it. That was the real wealth. Not dollars in a bank, but alignment. A life where time and values walked in step. A home where quiet was welcomed, not filled. A partnership that wasn't built on splitting bills, but on building dreams. A way of being in the world that said, "We may not have much, but we know what we do have, and we are grateful." Their land jar still sat on the shelf. The numbers climbed slowly. No rush. No pressure. Just quiet progress. Like everything else they had created. And as the camera pulls back from that tiny apartment, from the window fogged with warm air, from the mattress on the floor, from the loaf cooling on the counter, and the notebook stacked like bricks, they don't wave or smile or pose. They just live, exactly as they chose. And that, more than any twist or triumph, is what makes this story extraordinary. They didn't win the lottery. They didn't strike gold or go viral. They just chose differently and kept choosing every single day. Lena and Amir's story isn't flashy. It's not made for headlines, but it's real. It's what happens when two people decide that peace is worth more than convenience. That purpose is worth more than pride. That enough isn't a number. It's a practice. They didn't escape the system. They built a life outside of it. One envelope, one loaf of bread, one honest decision at a time. And maybe that's the invitation for the rest of us. Not to live on $12,000, but to ask, what am I really spending for? And what could I do with less? So if this story moved you, if it made you pause, breathe, or whisper, "I want that kind of calm," then you already know the first step. This is Smart Saver Saturday. Subscribe to Dollar by Dollar and start crafting a life that feels rich on your own terms.